Okay, welcome everyone. I should know how many of these, this is our whatever number of our educational Zooms this winter, but I don't. So welcome to this one. Just a reminder that next week we'll be having a chat with Robert Dover and Stefan Peters about sort of the state of dressage and where it's come from and where it's going. Hope you all can join us for that. Trafalgar Square, the bookstore, which has been a sponsor of Dressage4Kids, I think, from the very, very beginning. You know, this is our 25th year of Dressage4Kids. Anyway, they have donated a book, a gift certificate, I should say, and we will be having a drawing in the middle of the presentation today for someone to receive that. And before we get going with today, I want to once again thank the people who are responsible for organizing this program, Susan Sieber and Carol Baker, who have been so helpful in many of our educational programs with Dressage4Kids. And of course, Mary Livernoir, our executive director, who does all the annoying organizing that I used to have to do. And thank goodness I don't have to do it anymore. Thank you, Mary. But let's get right on to tonight. I think it's going to be a fascinating talk and something that I think not enough people are paying attention to enough as I travel around the country. I'm amazed at how often I have to comment on the grooming and care of the horses that I see in front of me. So we'll be hearing tonight from Emma Ford, originally from England and was raised surrounded by horse field, and also followed the pony club system and successfully competed in jumper classes. After completing her Bachelor of Science at the University of Wales, she moved to the United States where she managed Adrian Iorio's advanced event horses for 7 years, then moved on to manage Philip Dutton's horses. She's groomed at almost every 5-star event in the world, eventing, and has been a groom for the US eventing team at multiple Olympic, World, and Pan American Games. In 2021, she retired from grooming and now manages Twin Ponds Rehabilitation Farm in New York. Kat Hill, who also with us, grew up in upstate New York with a failed pulling pony as her first friend. She competed in 4-H, then the Arabian Breed on the Arabian Breed Show circuit, and then on to the IHSA Hunter shows in college. After graduating with a history degree, she took a semester off to work at a yard in Ireland and was introduced to the sport of eventing, which she fell in love with. Returning to the States, she worked for a top American dressage rider before landing in the eventing world, first as a working student before quickly realizing her skill was greater on the ground than in the tack and stepping into her role as a groom. She spent several years at Dupuis Asmar's head groom, where she learned about working for a listed rider and participating on her first US team trip. After that, she stepped into freelance grooming so she could have more personal time and start a family. She's groomed for top dressage event and hunter riders in her time as a freelancer. So I turn it over to these very capable ladies so we can learn more about how we take care of our horses and how we turn them out beautifully. You're on.
Awesome. Thank you, Lennon, so much for that great introduction. And thank you, everybody, for signing on and listening to hear what we have to say. So we decided to, we really feel through our careers that grooming, a lot of people feel is, oh, they hear the word grooming and they think brushing. And to us, that is probably one of the most minor parts of taking care of horses. And we've titled this chat as Putting the Horse First, because we feel it's such an all-encompassing routine of how we take care of our horses and how we get to reach our goals. But to reach our goals, we have to have a horse that is well managed and happy in life. Kat, do you want to take it from there?
Sure. If I can figure out how to change my slide, we will. There we go. So we have, simple Webster dictionary. What is horsemanship? The act or art of riding and of training and managing. it's not just riding. And one of the things that I think we forget about is how important the outside of the riding time is to the horses. Because if you think about a horse being ridden, you're riding a horse 20 minutes to maybe an hour and a half, 5 days a week, maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit more, depending on your program. So that's really a tiny amount of time in the horse's life. And all of those other hours have to be managed and have to be cared for. And the horses have to have the quality of life in those hours, as well as just for that, half an hour, 40 minutes that you're in the tack, or the little bit of time that you're prepping them to be in the tack. So it's one of the most important things to remember is that horsemanship isn't just about sitting in the saddle.
And hang on.
Emma?
Yeah, hang on. Bear with me, people. I've got to mute my thing. I can't read it.
Oh.
Okay. So it doesn't matter how good you are if you're on the sidelines. I was very privileged to go to a sports seminar a couple of years ago out in Oregon, Portland, Oregon, with some top vets. But it also included the human top athletes and the professionals within different sports of NBA and basketball. And the whole idea was how to approach how do those professionals take care of their horse themselves, and how we can learn from that to how we take care of our horses. And this was one of the phrases that Chris Stackpole used when he was giving his presentation. And to me, it really sort of hit home, because the best rider in the world can have 10 top horses, but if all of them aren't performing at 100%, or if one of them isn't performing at 100%, then at the end of the day, they could be sitting on the sidelines. So it doesn't matter what talent you have. It doesn't matter what discipline you do. It doesn't matter what level you are riding at. You still need to be able to manage your horse so that you can actually get on your horse every day and ride them. So as you have probably already figured out, me and Kat are very, very big on how we take care of our horses and how well we know our horses. And for us, we feel the word longevity is very important. Obviously, as you grow up, as you get taller, you're going to pass from horse to horse, but we all want our favorite ponies to last for a lifetime. Wouldn't that be amazing if they could all grow up and we can see them up until they're like 30, 35 years old. And we know that with the improvements in veterinary care, that we can elongate the lives of horses. However, it is our job as horse carers, as riders, it is our job as owners to be advocates for our horses. And although our horses can't physically speak to us, or you can't hear them talk, we do believe very much that every time you're looking at your horse, every time you're riding your horse, they are talking to you, they are telling you how they feel. So working how you work your horse, how you manage your horse on the ground is all very, very important to the longevity of your equine partner. Kat, do you want to move on?
So when we talk about individualized whole horse programs, it's one of the things that I see most common, especially at facilities where you have somebody in charge of the facility, a trainer or a boarding manager, a stable manager. They would really oftentimes, for the ease of care, it's easier to have all the horses on the same schedule, all the horses on the same feeding program, all the horses on the same turnout schedule. And Emma and I both believe really strongly that each horse has their individual opinions and has their individual nutritional needs. And those things are vital to making sure that the horse in front of you is the horse that does really well. So I always talk about, I have horses that I've cared for that really don't like being outside, that if it's buggy, they don't want to be out. If it's cold, they don't want to be out. If it's slightly sprinkling, no thank you, they'd like their nice dry stall. I also have horses that absolutely hate their stall and would really like to be outside in the blizzard, with a blanket on, thank you very much. They don't need that barn for anything. And to keep those two horses happy, you can't necessarily have them living in the exact same pattern. So trying to figure out how to manage the horses in a way that is doable for the people, but is also keeping the horses really happy. Because ultimately, our happy horses are horses that are going to perform well in the arena for us, and are also going to be horses that last a long time doing their career, because they're not going to get sour and they're not going to get sick. So making sure that we're looking at the whole pieces, like all of the different pieces of a horse's life. How do they feel about friends? How do they feel about going in and out? How do they feel about, how's their nutrition? Some horses need more nutritional help than others to keep performing their best. And it's really important to look at how all of those pieces. And to do that, you're probably going to need a team. It takes a village to get there. And what we mean by that is that it is going to take many professionals and many people to keep learning and to keep knowing what to do. So you need to have vets on your team who can help you evaluate your horse's soundness and nutrition and wellness, who are knowledgeable about, as you progress through the levels, who are very knowledgeable about how horses move. So you have to make sure that you're working with vets that you trust and that are really good at understanding horses. You have to, same thing with having a good farrier, that a little bit of a change in a horse's shoeing can be the difference between a lovely extended trot and a horse who's kind of doesn't want to move out and move with that freedom of expression. So you have to have those professionals. You also have to make sure that you have professionals in your horse's day-to-day life. The people who work at your barn, whether it's your stall cleaner, if you don't keep them at home yourself, or your boarding manager, those people are vital to your horse's fundamental well-being. Because when you have a stall cleaner or a barn worker at the very basic keeping the barn tidy level, who is aware and who notices, like, hey, there wasn't a lot of manure in this stall last night, that can mean the difference between catching a horse who's maybe not feeling great because they're thinking about colicking and not. So there's nobody who comes in contact with your horse who's unimportant. You have to have a trainer who you feel like is providing you with good feedback so you could be riding your horse well and doing fair, consistent training programs in the saddle. And if you utilize grooms, you have to have grooms who are themselves trained and experienced enough to help care for the animal on the ground when you're not able to. So it's important to look at the whole program surrounding your horse, not just, the moments when you're there hopping on or doing what you're doing, or even if you have your horse at home and you care for a lot of it yourself, who else is helping you? If you're going out of town, if you're, have an extra school night, who's there helping? How are they helping? And how can you make sure as the rider that that whole program is tailored to your horse? Do you want to start with this, Em, or you want me to?
Sure, I'll go ahead. So what is normal and abnormal? Basically, this is the very basics of getting to know your horse. These are things that every day you should be taking a quick check of. I like to sometimes think of it as a scan. Just when you check in with your horse every morning, or if your horse is at a boarding place, maybe when you first approach your horse. These are sort of points that I think are very important to really be able to acknowledge, be able to remember. I actually encourage, or we both encourage people to have diaries. So if your horse is maybe changing behavior in a certain way, that you write it down. You need to be writing everything from their work down to when they've shod, when have they been wormed, what antibiotics might have they had. And then once you have this history of your horse, it's very easy to be able to look back and see if there's a certain pattern. But what are the things that we mean when we say normal and abnormal? So I think behavior is probably one of the most common ones people think about. So it might be, how does your horse first act when he sees you? When you come in the barn in the morning, first thing, and you just say hi, does he put his head over the door to greet you? Or is he more of a stoic horse that likes to stand in the back of the stall? Why this is important is because if that changes, this is them talking to you. This is them saying, hey, there's something different in my world. And I feel XYZ. You know, obviously there's so many, there's many things that can be going on. But take note, always take note of how your horse reacts. Obviously eating and drinking habits are huge. We recommend that you should always be able to know exactly what your horse is drinking. Many stalls, you know, if your horse is boarded, many stalls now, boarding barns will have automatic waterers that it's very hard to know what your horse is drinking every day, right? So, but a horse should drink, depending on its size, anywhere from 6 to 10 gallons for a larger horse on a regular day. And if that is changing, if he's drinking less, if he's drinking more, again, that is, you need to find out what is normal and abnormal. So I'd recommend taking time if your horse is lives out all the time or is only on automatic waterers. We recommend taking time to like cover the automatic waterers and putting buckets in stalls for a week, and then just assessing your horse's behavior. How much does he drink? Does he drink as soon as he comes in from work? Does he drink as soon as he comes in from the paddock? I can remember years ago at Phillips, I would bring a horse in and it went straight to its water bucket, and it would never normally do that. So my first thought was to go and check the water troughs out in the paddock. And sure enough, the water trough had been knocked over. Now, who knows what time of night that water trough knocked over, but obviously the horse was very thirsty. But for me, that's an important, that I don't just ignore that behavior. There's a reason he's doing something different.
And I'm just going to step on him for 2 seconds to say, also remember that part of the reason for covering it is when you take your horse away from home to go to a horse show, if you don't know what your horse's normal drinking is at home, like I have one pony who's part Arab and she's a camel. She drinks like 3 to 5 gallons tops. So I know that if I'm at a horse show and she only drinks 5 gallons, that's not problematic. But if I were to take another horse to a horse show that I didn't know and they only drank that much, that could be a real cause for panic or concern. So making sure that you're transferring like some of this normal behavior and testing those things are so that you have that information when you then are in a situation where you need to know, is my horse a heavy drinker or a light drinker in their averages?
You can cover eating. You cover eating.
Oh. So same idea with eating, making sure that we know our horses' eating habits. So the more that we learn about horses, the more that we learn that their digestive system is really, really tied to their health and wellness. And it takes a really long time for horses to adjust to feeding changes. So it can take 10 to 14 days for a horse's belly to get used to new forage. So that means new hay, new grass. So many of us know about the changes in grains, but we don't necessarily think about, we changed hay. So knowing that your barn just got a new load of hay in and that change has happened, if there's something on with your horse, is important. So knowing where, what their forage is, because that's going to be the biggest part of their eating, and what their grain is. And then also the same thing as far as normal. Like I have some horses who come in, and if they don't lick that feed pail clean, I'm concerned about them. And then I have other horses who come in and they might eat a little bit and drink and walk around and eat a little bit more, and that's their normal. So it's changes in what is your horse's normal. And it's important when you're looking at eating to remember that you have to make changes slowly to see an effect. So if you have a horse who's losing weight, you need to slowly build in calories to get them to gain weight. And it's going to take several weeks for them to gain weight. You can't feed them on Monday and expect them to have put weight on by Friday if they've started to go downhill. So you have to kind of take the long view of their eating habits and pay a lot of attention to what is their normal and what's their abnormal, because it can be such an early note that there's a problem. So if you have a horse who normally cleans up their hay, I have a horse in my barn right now who I did not realize, a bale that I fed all the horses, he always goes straight to the bale and like shoves his whole head in it, in his outside feeder. And I'd split the bale between 3 horses, and he went out, took a sniff, and walked away. So immediately went out to check. And sure enough, there'd actually been a dead mouse in the hay bale that I hadn't found or seen or smelled. And so that whole hay bale needed to be chucked, because otherwise it could have made the horses sick. And if I hadn't known to pay attention to the fact that he is always the one who immediately devours his hay, I would have just thought, oh, he's going out to eat some grass instead. So making sure that you know their eating habits. And that takes us back to the village conversation, because to know their eating habits, if you are not the one physically feeding them every single day, you need to make sure that you have good communication with the staff who is feeding the horse, so that you can have that, like, hey, has there been any difference in my horse's feeding? Or are we making any changes? Like, what's, so that you're constantly in conversation, so that you have the knowledge of what's normal and abnormal for your horse.
Moving on to attitude. This is obviously very linked in with behavior. But when I think of attitude, this is how I see the horse as we move him around the different environments. So what I mean by that is, how does he react? How is his attitude when you put him on cross ties and start to tack him up? How is his attitude when you start to groom him? Does he enjoy being groomed? Does he have special spots he's being groomed? Is he ears back pinned, ears pinned forward? Is he trying to chew on you? This to me is all, again, the horse is talking to us, and are we listening? I definitely feel people today aren't necessarily in the moment with their horses, and it's super important that we bring ourselves in the moment during these the times that we do spend with them, so that we can start listening. So, I think listening to your horse's attitude when he is around, when new horses come into the barn, making sure you just don't throw a horse into a paddock with a herd of, horses that he's never met before. Maybe you ride a new horse and you notice that when you're on him and he's passing another horse in the arena, that he gets a little bit grouchy. It wouldn't be a good idea just to throw him out in a paddock and say, hey, see how you get on. That would be something you would want to introduce very slowly, maybe put them in a paddock next to each other, so that they can get to know each other, and then stand there and watch them for a while and see how they interact with each other. And if that goes well, then you can maybe take the next step. And then also attitude, but what they are like at home versus what are they like at a show. Horses at home, some horses, they're very same. They don't change. They don't find anything too stressful. So they don't have a different attitude at a show. But a lot of horses and performance horses tend to feel the stress when they're at the show. They know when they get on the trailer that they're going somewhere. Some get excited, some get very nervous. But all these attitudes are telling you something, and what can we change to make them be more comfortable for that situation. My big thing is trailering horses, and I never, especially when, whilst I was working for Philip, we would be trailering 6, 7, 8 horses at a time, and how each horse performed at an event was related to how well, if they had traveled 12 hours, how tired were they when they got off. And a horse that showed me that he was very nervous and was very maybe aggressive to a horse on the trailer, to me, that was a horse I would always try and see how would he travel better? Was it simply he had a friend that I would put him next to? He preferred traveling next to mares. Philip's big horse, Mighty Nice, traveled way better next to a mare than he did to a gelding. He also preferred, he was not a horse you could put in a single, what we call a single out of Tripoli. You always had to have a double stall or in a box stall. Otherwise, he got extremely grouchy and would start kicking a lot, which obviously was very nervous for me because you were always trying to watch their legs. So really understanding what makes them tick and what changes that attitude and how we can improve them and help them at shows is super important. You have to remember we're taking them out of their natural habitat all the time. And yes, they have been domesticated for thousands of years, but that doesn't mean that their natural go-to is a fear or a flight response. So really working with that and keep bearing that in mind, I think, is super important. Do you want to do TPR, Kat?
Sure. So TPR stands for temperature, pulse, respiration. And it's really important for you to know what your horse's normal temperature, pulse, and respiration are. Any of you who came through the Pony Club ranks, you guys know this inside out and backwards, because it is something that you guys have been asked to monitor and pay attention to. But when we talk about making sure that normal and abnormal, one of the things that you need to know is how your horse reacts to stressful situations. So sometimes Emma and I do a lot of this at the end of our cross country. We know we have some horses who are going to get done with our cross country and their temperature is going to kind of want to climb before it comes back down. Some of them come off and their temperature levels out really quickly, but maybe their heart rate goes up or maybe their respiration, they start to pant a little bit. So knowing what's normal for your horse, there are a lot of horses out there who nostril breathe and can trick you into thinking that that's their actual breath. So it's important to know where to look on the flank to actually look for their respiration rate. And to, as Emma was saying, be present. So when you're in the barn day to day, pay attention. Say to yourself, do I notice my horse breathing? Are they a horse who breathes heavily or are they a very light, shallow breather at rest? And then what about at work? I think we've all been in the arena or ridden those horses who like breathe heavy the whole ride or make little snorties whenever they canter or whenever they jump. And for those horses that sort of like to make, it's not vocalizations, but where they like to make noise with their nose, that's not concerning if that's their normal. So it's paying attention to is that a horse who normally sort of does that? You know, I've had those horses that kind of grunt every single canter step. But if I have a horse who isn't used to doing that, and then they're breathing heavily and they're grunting or breathing heavily through their nose, maybe there's something wrong. Maybe they're overheating. Maybe they're not feeling well. So knowing what is normal and what is not, and how quickly they recover. So how quickly can they normally come back down? So if you go and do your dressage test and your horse is panting afterwards, you're probably not quite fit enough. Your horse needs to do some fitness work. You need to work with your trainer to make sure that they're fit enough to come back down. Because most of the time when we're going to dressage shows, especially, you're not just doing one class. You've got multiple things you need to do. And you need to know how your horse is recovering in between so you don't push them past the point that they can do just because you happen to be at the competition and you'd already signed up for that class. Knowing if your horse is responding in a normal way to the stress of being ridden and worked is important. And so it's just about keeping a journal. Emma and I you'll probably hear us say it 10 times in this talk, write stuff down, pay attention and write stuff down. When you get to the barn, check their temperature, pulse, and respiration. When you're grooming them, check again. When you're riding, take a pause, halt for a moment and check your horse's temperature and pulse and respiration. Can't really check their temperature, but you can do a visual check-in. Are their veins standing up? Do they seem to be very sweaty for the conditions outside? If it's 90 degrees outside, sure, they're going to be sweaty. But if it's 45 and you haven't worked that hard, maybe you need to pay attention and be concerned about that. So it's just about knowing what's normal and evaluating throughout your interactions with your horse.
And I think one important point to bring up here is, especially with temperature, it's so important for being on top of illnesses. I always encourage barns to have at least 5 to 6 thermometers somewhere in their barn. And to be honest, I would say every grooming kit should have a thermometer in. Nowadays, everybody pretty much uses the digital ones, which they're not quite as accurate as the mercury, but they do break very easily, or they'll get damp and the battery will go down, or the battery would just be dead. So I always encourage people have multiple thermometers around. But temperature is the first thing you should go to if you see an abnormal in your horse. So if your horse doesn't eat, you take its temperature first. If your horse comes in with a swollen leg, even if it's real obvious, even if you have a cut on a hind leg and it's just a little bit puffy, take its temperature to double check. If he isn't drinking water, take his temperature just to see where you are at. We really cannot hound on how important it is. At shows for us, we have to take their temperatures daily, and then we have to report it actually into FEI, into an FEI app. It's very important. I know that, as with everything, horses have a range, and there are always outsiders of that range. So we tend to say, 98 to 100.5 is a normal range. However, you will always have horses that will maybe temp at 97, or you're going to have the horse that normal temperature is 100.5, maybe towards 101. But unless you know what is normal for your horse, how do you know your horse is going into fever? A horse that is normally 97 and has a temperature of 99, that's on the high side for him. So knowing that is super important. What we recommend is, if you have the ability to take, say, 5 days in a row, 7 would be ideal, but take 5, whatever is what you can work into your schedule, and take the temperature of your horse every day, same time, under the same conditions as best as possible, and just see what normal resting temperature is. So you can take the temperature 7 days in a row, divide it by 7, and then that would be your average normal temperature for your horse. And that way you can even post it. If you're at a boarding board, post it on the door, so that should the manager come in and for some reason feel the temperature needs to be taken, they can be like, oh, okay, we know what's happening with this horse. We know whether it's gone up or whether it's gone down. So super important for you to understand the importance of temperature, and be able to call your vet. We always say, if you talk to a vet, they want to know what the temperature is, and ideally, can you tell them it's got a racing pulse? Your horse has his resting pulse. Even if you don't know the rate and can't take the rate of a pulse, understand whether it is a racing pulse. His when you feel underneath the cheekbone, and I'm sure you'll have places that trainers can help you find the pulse. I always say, practice after you have ridden your horse. Go out and do some canters, take a lesson and just ask your trainer if you can stop after a canter once their heart rate should be up, and then find the pulse so that you feel very quickly to find it and feel what a racing pulse feels like. And that way you can give the vet information, and he knows what he's coming to before he actually gets there. So temperature, super, super important. Moving on to manure. We always joke, we always have to talk about poop. Not everybody wants to talk about poop, but when it comes to horses, it's super informative. And I'm sure most of you understand what regular poop should look like, as in softballs that break when it hits the ground, and what abnormal poop is. And I know, throughout my career, why do I need to know what normal is? Well, because some horses do change, like some horses, they'll get on the trailer, they'll get off at the event, and they'll immediately get very excited and have running manure. Well, I'm not too worried about that. I know that they've just trailered, they've just got excited. They can have that like nervous manure. But then obviously we go back again to it being a sign of, is something happening? Is there something concerning within his physical well-being that we need to think about? Is he showing any signs of colic? Is the manure super dry? Is he, if I came in one morning and a horse had very, very wet manure, I would then go to take the temperature, because obviously manure and a temperature are first clinical signs of, you know, some of the viruses or potomac horse fever.
Oh, geez.
Oh, geez.
Sorry.
No worries, confusing me.
Sorry, I bumped my desk.
So manure is super important. And again, going back to your journal, knowing what changes manure, when is it okay to be like, oh, okay, that happened, it's going to be like this for a couple of days. Worming is a big one. Worming can change. Spring season, I'm sure you're all seeing it now in your horses that are out on the fresh grass. Their manure is starting to maybe be a bit more sloppy in consistency because of the spring grass. It should not stay that way. It should revert back to being normal manure after they've got used to the spring grass. Has your horse been on antibiotics? Something like that can change manure. And if it becomes persistent, if it becomes like wet diarrhea a lot, then it's something you should be concerned about and talk to your vet about. Is their digestive system, is their digestive tract not optimally functioning? Shouldn't have used that. So I won't carry on forever, but always knowing what is normal and abnormal manure, super, super important. You go.
All right, let's talk about normal for muscles and legs. This is one of my favorite ones to talk about, because I think that we all know that it's supposed to be, that we're supposed to pay attention to those things. But oftentimes we forget these, which are our most important tool. The best way to assess your horse's muscles and legs is to feel them all the time, to know what they feel like normally. One of the things that I like to have people do is to put their fingers together and push. As soon as you see a color change anywhere in your fingers, you're pushing too hard to feel for heat or problems in the leg. When we as grooms feel a horse's legs, we very much float our fingers down the legs. We don't squeeze. Because when you squeeze, you're turning off a lot of the nerves, the things that feel in the tips of your fingers. So when you squeeze like that, you're not going to actually end up feeling the problems. So making sure that you're running your hands over your horse's body before they work and after they work. Journaling comes in huge on this. And just like with the temperature, I think it's really important to take a period of time with your personal horse and feel their legs, ideally very carefully, and writing notes. Because some horses always do what's called stocking up. Their legs fill up with a little bit of fluid after they've been standing in all night. And some horses don't. Some horses' legs are still nice and tight in the morning if they've been in a stall all night. So making sure that you know, if your horse is a horse who stocks up at night when you're at the horse show, okay, are there things that you can do to help make sure that they don't stock up? Or knowing that maybe a horse is going to need a little bit of an extra walk before you ride, an extra hand walk to move around and get rid of that fluid. The other big thing that I like to get people to pay attention to is we, as grooms, want to know if something's old. And every single one of us grooms have been caught out at some point where we go with a horse that's recently under our care and they're sore. And we go to feel their legs and we go, oh my gosh, did this horse always have a splint? I can't remember if this horse had a splint. I can't remember if I felt this splint or not before. And that's where making sure that you're conscious and present in the moment, and ideally have a journal when you're first taking care of horses so you can say, nope, the splint's there. It's not new. It's cold and it's hard. That's probably not the cause of their lameness. But sometimes those things can be confusing when we get nervous or worried when we see a sore horse. And having those journal entries to be like, okay, I know my horse is sore, but my journal says that every single time that they work hard, the next day their ankles are a little puffy. So that's probably not causing the soreness this time. Or it keeps getting worse, that their ankles are a little big, maybe we need to have the vet and my trainer help look at that and see if that's a problem. So making sure that we're feeling those things. Horses' muscles, every horse's muscles feel differently. Some breeds and some types of horses always feel rock hard. Their muscles feel very tight. Some other horses, muscles, even when they're quite fit, still feel a little bit jiggly. And knowing what is normal for your horse, because if you have a horse who normally has like soft, buttery muscles and they've got really tight sections or spots or whole areas, or that they're just tight all over, well, that's a really important indicator to you that there's something wrong with that horse. And at the same time, if you have a horse who's normally pretty tight and looks very fit, who you come in and they have the appearance of just being a little soft and a little saggy and a little loose, that can be a horse who's really depressed. Oftentimes that can be matched with a fever. So making sure that you're doubling down on checking all over your horse with your hands. There's no other way to know how they feel. I'm just going to answer the question or shoot this question to Emma. Did you see the question chat about the spring grass, since we brought, just to jump back to that?
Can you read it to me?
Teresa asks, how long should it take a horse to get used to spring grass or grass in a new home?
Oh, that's a good question. And I'm going to say, again, going back to horses being individuals, but every horse is a bit different. I would expect to see a horse normalize, providing you as keeping him on the same routine, but I would expect to see a horse normalize between a week to 2 weeks. And obviously, it's very important to, if you have a horse that might be prone to laminitis, or, the Cushing, something like that, how long we turn our horses out on the spring grass is super important. So, if you do have one of those horses, and their manure changes as well, you might want to think about, pulling your horse off the grass or muzzling before you even go on. But for me, I mean, Kat, would you agree, like a week to 2 weeks?
Yeah, I would have said 7 to 12 days. So
yeah,
very much the same. If we're getting, to a long 2 weeks, I'm starting to think. The only thing I will say about that is, like, up here we've had a strange spring and it's cold again here in New York, which slows our grass down. So a lot of my horses were starting to have some spring poops, and now they're not. But I'm not going to be surprised if, when it gets warm and the grass starts coming in after the rain, that it comes back again, because that's a new event, because there's been new environmental changes. So that's the only time when I would say the spring grass can take a little bit longer than our usual 7 to 14 days or 1 to 2 weeks, is when they, when we've got those seasons that are kind of extended, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Which right now, I think every state is different.
Yeah.
Think through a spring stroke summer stroke spring. So
I'm going to interrupt at this
yes.
moment, let you
Yeah.
take a drink of water. Since we've heard them both speaking for a moment, Kat and Emma, I just wanted to tell you a little bit more about them. They've collaborated to write a best-selling book called World Class Grooming for Horses. After the success with that, they began a business under the name of World Class Grooming, offering clinics, seminars, and consulting services. They've traveled the country teaching about care and husbandry of horses, with their motto being, "It is our mission to help elevate the level of care and understanding that all horses experience, no matter what discipline that they are involved in." So they're trying to teach through their books and clinics and so forth that hard work, patience, and time will strengthen the relationship between each horse and his or her caretaker. They've also published 2 other books together, World Class Braiding and The Kid's Guide to Horsemanship and Grooming, which came out late last year. And now, having talked about their books, I'll turn it over. Mary will draw. She puts all of the names of people who have signed up for this talk tonight. And we get to go. She has her elegant hat there, and Mary, go ahead and draw out of the hat.
Okay, yep, it's my.
And you
piece of
have to
paper.
be present when she draws your name to get the gift certificate to
Yes.
Trafalgar Square Books.
All right, so this can sometimes take a minute because we have to find people. All right,
for it.
Jennifer Brown is the first one.
Is Jennifer Brown here? Jump up and down, wave.
No.
No, Jennifer Brown. She
Uh,
loses.
Katya? Yes, Katya Swepka. I think she's on. I see her. So,
Fantastic.
Katya, I will email you afterwards, okay? I'll send you all the details.
Congratulations, Katja. Okay, Kat and Emma, you're on again.
All right. Emma, do you want to finish out our slide on what stresses
I
them
think-
travel shows?
Yeah, I think I sort of covered, hopefully we're hitting home the stresses, what stresses them, and what is abnormal and normal for them when we take them off the farm. Obviously shows and all around travel is a very stressful in itself for them. So how can we best help them get through those periods? But I added on to that also thinking about the vet and the farrier and the floater. I'm actually right now in a position managing a rehab facility. So every horse that comes into me, I don't know anything about. All I get is a piece of paper that says, hey, this horse has come in for such and such injury. And I have to text the owner and be like, okay, what do I expect? What do they feed? What do they eat? And it's always surprising that I'll have to like get the farrier out to do them, and then all of a sudden, the farrier goes to hot shoe and the horse doesn't like it. And the owner will be like, oh yeah, no, he doesn't like being hot shot. So to me, it's knowing these things and being able to communicate with the correct people is super, super important, and making sure you do that. So I think Kat will move on to the next slide and keep moving forward. If you want to go ahead with this one.
So when we talk about creating a holistic plan for our horse, we oftentimes like to pick out our end goal and then make a plan working backwards from that goal. And as that plan goes, we're going to be talking about, okay, is there a big end goal competition? Is there a championships that you're trying to go to? Is there a big show that you've always wanted to get to in the end of your season? And then planning out from there and filling in the other competitions that you're going to be doing, so that way you can, figure out how to do this. Some of our older horses or horses who need a little bit more physical care are always a little bit sore the day or two after a farrier visit, not from their feet being done, but just from holding their legs up and taking care of or in balancing themselves for that amount of time. So you maybe wouldn't want to be scheduling your farrier for the day before you go to a horse show. You'd want to be filling in that schedule around your competition. Same thing with the vet. You don't want to be giving vaccinations and then expecting your horse to go compete the next day or the day after, because sometimes those vaccinations can cause soreness or cause a little bit of fever or cause the horse to just feel tired and icky. And then making sure that you're developing a conditioning plan. It's really important to work with your trainer developing that conditioning plan and work with the professionals that are in your team, because as you're developing that conditioning plan, you need to make sure that your horse has periods of downtime and rest in there. Rest is really important when we're talking about getting our horses fit. So making sure that your conditioning plan has all of the things, has intense workouts where they work really hard. Maybe you go to a lesson and you and they are both sweaty and feel exhausted at the end of it. Great, that's going to help build their condition, but making sure that you're not then going, gallop the day after that, where you're paying attention to the conditioning plan for your horse so that we aren't overloading their bodies all at once or underloading them, not giving them enough work and then expecting them to be able to go and do something. So, you kind of fill in, you put in your competitions on your calendar, and then you put in your farrier visits on the calendar, you put in the vet visits on your calendar. And then that gives you a way to kind of look and see, okay, where does their fitness need to be and what do I need to be doing with them to get that in? And then from there, you put in your training, your lessons, your schooling shows, and see how it all works together to make a plan. Because sometimes we even have things like schooling shows that are ones we really enjoy. Our friends are all going to them. It's really a fun lark to go to those schooling shows. But making sure that you're not, say, going to a lesson on one day and then 2 days later you have a schooling show and then 3 days later you have your big important competition, because that might have overloaded your horse if that wasn't part of your plan. Maybe you have a horse who does much better when they're really busy. You know, we have those horses in our program that, man, the busier that you can keep their brains and the more places you can be going with them, the more settled they are at the big competition. So maybe those horses you do want to schedule your lesson, your clinic, your schooling show, bam, to your competition so that they're all worked in and ready to compete. But it's important to make that a cat, like get your journal out and write those things down, and then try to hold your nose to it at least week to week, that you're trying to keep those plans as much as possible. Life happens, things go wrong, but making sure that you don't have 3 or 4 weeks where you've missed things or where things have gone way off track and you're still expecting that next goal to be right in place. Do you have anything to add on that one, Em, or should I go to the next?
No, I think you covered that. Should we move to the next slide? So if you go in with an advantage, you come out with an advantage. This was another quote that came from actually our team masseuse for the US eventing team. And she is a miracle worker, miracle body worker, and her knowledge of biomechanics is unreal. But what she's saying here is, if you take care of the small details along the way, if you notice and don't ignore or accept a resistance in your horse that may not have been there before and make a difference, that you then will have a horse that will last longer. It will come out with an advantage and feel better in the long run and perform better. We always say it's always in the small details. Something so small as scratches or a boot rub can, if not taken care of quickly, can actually send a horse backwards. You know, there's plenty of times I've been at a competition and someone's shown up with a boot rub on day one, and by the time they get to show jumping, the horse is so sore that it cannot make it to the show jumping. So again, these are all things we need to be on top of, and that is up to you as the horse's caretaker to know what you are seeing, what you are feeling. You know, as Kat said before, hands, it's all about the hands, and listening to them. The important thing to realize is that resistance leads to injury. So this is sort of also about longevity. When you are riding your horse, is he normally very soft and supple to the right, but maybe not so great to the left? And there are the obvious things you need to look at first if this is the case. Number one, what are you doing up there? We sit on our horse's backs and there's a bit in its mouth and we're playing with its mouth. Are you a little bit more right than you are left? Are you not pushing him inside rein to outside leg? You are the number one go-to when you feel a resistance in your riding. If your trainer's saying, no, you're looking great, you're looking very balanced. Okay, well, what about saddle fit? What about tack fit? Are we affecting the horse's movement through our saddle fit? That's the next thing to go to. Are we produce, a saddle that is very tight over the withers will produce a horse. The horse isn't going to want to move through his shoulder. So super important saddle fit. So if you've covered your basis, then you want to go to, well, is it something relevant on the body? And again, going back to hands, how do their muscles feel? This is again important. Like, is there a bulge in one side of his neck that wasn't there last week? Does he need chiropractor? Does he need muscle relief, myofascial relief? So there are techniques out there. Myself and Kat use a technique called a piece of equipment called the posture prep, which is a very simple technique of currying your horse to help relieve the fascia and keep their skin loose. We always say the resistance starts with the skin. If you have scar tissue at the skin level adhering to the next layer of skin, right there as a resistance, and over time that can cause even more resistance going through the body. And then reverting to being prepared to take that step back. Just because your friend is going to that show that you've always wanted to go to, just because your goal is, has been for 10 years to go to that show and you think you're there, but all of a sudden your horse is telling you something through his body language, or you're feeling something that isn't quite right, then maybe you have to be prepared to step back and you have to have a plan B. Maybe it needs to happen next year. Maybe it just needs 2 weeks and a vet evaluation, and he'll be like, okay, you'll be fine, back up at it. But you must be prepared to look at the situation and be prepared to have that plan B. Kat, do you want to add to anything on that?
I think the only thing I would add is that, remember, being on top of small details will mean that maybe you need to take a short step back and your plan B can be smaller. If you wait until the small detail is a big detail, then you're likely to definitely miss the big thing. So as soon as you start noticing those small things, that's the moment to say, okay, maybe we need to take a little bit of a step back and evaluate what this small thing is. Because oftentimes when we push through the small details that we know are an issue, then we make a bigger issue, and then our plan B tends to be a bit farther away from where our plan A was originally. Okay, so these are Emma's.
All about both of us.
Well, they're both of ours, really. The next one is the one that we have divided out. So this one is our pet peeves. Go ahead, Em.
Yeah, we just wanted to finish off with a bit sort of things that we see at horse shows and barns. When we walk into clinics, we sort of, I hate to say we're judgmental, but I think we are a little bit judgmental when we walk into barns. So very easy things that you do or don't do that tells us who are you? Are you someone to take that extra step, and very simple steps to take care of your horses? So leg straps is, many grooms, if you ask them, this will be their number one: leg straps on blankets that don't get done up correctly. When you take your back leg straps, you should always redo them on the outside before you take the blanket off. Not only is this for tidiness on the barn, but it is a huge safety thing as well. I always tell the people, like, my story of I was in Aiken one year and the vet was checking out a horse, and he checked the horse out, and then my working student threw the blanket back on and she hadn't done up the leg straps, and the horse was standing underneath a fan that was going, and the leg straps caught on the fan, and needless to say, I got run over, the vet got run over, the horse got loose. So it was a bit of a disaster, but it sort of everything was okay in the end. But for that one working student, I finally looked at it and said, now do you understand why I keep harping on about leg straps? And it sort of hit home. So leg straps is number one. You want to do number two?
Halter throat latches are probably my ultimate pet peeve, because the number of places that I see leading horses in and out from their fields, or standing on the cross ties with the throat latch loose, especially when they've got the big buckle on the end of it. If a horse shakes their head, that latch can bash them in the head. It can hook in their eye. It can hit you in the head. It's just a safety hazard, and it's such an easy thing to snap up. And in fact, in my personal barn, most of my horses I deal with in grooming halters, because I can't stand throat latch halters that are not done up. So if you have a throat latch on a halter, it must be done up, because it's a weapon, and horses shake their heads all the time. And we don't need to punish them for doing something as simple as shaking their head, because they don't know that that latch is going to then hit them, and it can really spook them. And I'm sure it can really hurt, even if it's not an actual injury. It cannot feel good to shake your head and have a big metal clasp whack you in the noggin. So buckle those up.
Trunks, number three. This is for, you might have a trunk in the aisle at your boarding barn, or you might have a trunk in the aisle at any of the shows you do that you stay overnight. And hopefully you do have a trunk that has wheels, which makes life a lot easier. But keeping those latches closed at all times, especially on the metal ones, is super important. It shows the aisles tend to be very narrow. And if someone comes down with a horse and for some reason they have to turn that horse around, or if a horse spooks, maybe a horse came out his stall and made an ugly face and made him spook, those latches are sharp enough to go through a tendon and end that horse's career, basically. And I know that might seem over the top, but I actually saw that happen at a show in Tryon a few years ago. And it was just simply that a groom had not done, she had a grooming stall and she had not done up her latches in the grooming stall. And when the horse went in and turned around to be put on cross ties, he caught a hind leg on that latch, and that horse was out for the rest of the season because of it. So always do up those latches.
Bridle sweat marks are another big pet peeve of, I think, every professional groom and every trainer. I guarantee that there are trainers who have harped on people about this as well. Because with bridles on their faces, anywhere where there's sweat that hasn't been brushed off, it not only makes the horse just look unloved, it makes it look like you've cared enough about riding to ride the horse to sweat and haven't cared enough about the horse to then remove the sweat marks. That's sort of what you're saying when you leave those sweat marks on the animal. Sometimes it can be tricky, especially if you're short. Having a step stool at the barn, a folding step stool, a little plastic step stool is really important so that you can climb up and make sure you can remove that well. Figuring out what removal technique works on what horse. There's lots of different techniques there. You can spray witch hazel on a towel and rub their face. You can use curry combs, the soft rubber kind, to do their face. One of the sort of random tricks that I have is to use a plastic cushion hairbrush on their face, because it gets into the nooks, and a lot of horses really love it because it's got that cushion to it and it breaks up all the sweat. So just making sure that you're taking the time, and if you can't reach that, finding somebody who can help you reach it, or finding a stool, or finding a way to figure out to train your horse to drop their head so you can get those off.
So number 5, horses not bedded deep enough. I know this can be very difficult, especially if you are not taking care of your own horse. For instance, the boarding barns, they manage how much bedding goes in the stalls. But it is super, super important to understand that horses need REM sleep to function at their best. And not giving them somewhere they can lie down extremely comfortable, the horses will not sleep. I can say that it is very noticeable. A couple of times I've gone into different barns and bedded the horses a lot deeper than they've been used to, and horses that have not been seen to lie down, within 2 hours we've seen them lie down as soon as you give them a deeper bed. So it is not only for protection, it's not as for warmth, it is to encourage them to lie down. One of the big things when we're at multi-day competitions and our long formats, you will see all the grooms with their horses up to knee high in beds, so that they are encouraged to take their Z's and take their rest. So do the best you can. I like I say, I do understand, like, it is difficult at boarding situations where you are not in control of the bedding, but if you are in charge of cleaning and that, making sure you're not wasting anything that is clean, help the money situation out a little bit. Don't throw away clean bedding. And to be honest, a lot of the times, the more bedding you add, I personally think it ends up actually being easier to clean the stall. The less bedding, you end up just stripping the stall every day and adding more bedding. So from my perspective, I do believe that you actually save if you actually bed a horse a lot deeper. So yeah, those are the 5 pet peeves, or our top pet peeves anyway, that we actually probably have about 105, but
Lyndon, should we keep going or should we pause? I don't know what our time situation is like. Oh, you're on mute.
So is London chiming in?
Sorry. We've done our hour. Maybe
Okay.
you could answer a few questions.
Sure,
Yeah.
we'd love to.
I had one that was sent to me, and I think something that many, this is about grooming specifically. Do you have a secret to white legs?
Well, I'll tell you my secrets. My secrets to white legs are twofold. One, you have to wash all the time. And one of the things Emma and I always tell people is that you have to wash legs, not just whiten legs. So whitening shampoo is not a particularly good cleanser. So if you have white legs, you have to make sure to wash them with a gentle shampoo or a gentle soap like Ivory, or we really love Shapley's products. So we use like Shapley's High Shine on their legs, or one of those on their legs before you get a whitening shampoo. The whitening shampoo you have to rub in until it's completely white. So you have to rub it with your fingers until all of the blue turns to like purple bubbles or whitish colored bubbles. If there's just streaks of blue, it hasn't actually activated enough to whiten the legs before you rinse it off really well. Regularly shampooing those legs and then regularly applying a spray detangler or silicone onto the white is going to prevent staining. I also have a bit of a cheat for when I have horses that live out a lot or are really just, filthy pigs, in that right before their competition, I will very carefully either use a standoff on my clippers or clip down the legs to clip just the tips of the hair off. In clipping up against the legs, dressage, it's still good. In some of the other sports, you're not allowed to do that anymore, so you have to be a bit careful. But making sure that you clip just the tips, the yellow tips off can make the horse look quite white. And then, do you have any like show day white leg tips?
So if you've done all that and you've still got yellow sprays, the couple of cheats that we have, I will say, and Shapley's do a whitening spray that is basically vegetable based, so there's no harm in using it. It definitely adds a whiteness to the legs, and it's you can just take your like Ivory or Dawn shampoo and wash it off after. So it's not chemical based, which is super good. And then also you can, if you actually wash the white legs and towel dry them as well as you can, and then take some baby powder and rub it through the white legs, that can add a little bit of whiteness to them as well. Just make sure you do that before you apply any hoof oil.
Okay. What must-haves should you bring to shows that you may not think of? Any special things that you take with you?
All of
I
it.
feel that's a real wide open question.
Everything you have, yeah.
Kat, I don't even know where to start with that.
I would say that a couple of my must-haves that I always bring is circling back. I always have thermometers with me when I'm traveling to the horse shows. I always make sure I have an extra halter and an extra lead rope or two, because they break. And even the nicest horse who's never pulled back ever in the history of pulling back or of their existence will suddenly pull back or step on their lead rope and then break their halter. So having extra halter and lead rope is one of those things I always have in my kit. And then I also am weird about the fact that I always carry one extra stirrup leather with me everywhere, because I've had a stirrup leather break at an inopportune moment and not been able to find the right length. So that's one of those just weird personal at the bottom of my trunk, just in case.
Yeah,
What
and the other thing, I always recommend people is to have some form of, maybe some ACE and or gel Democidine or something in the trailer. So just in case you do have that unfortunate event of your horse start to colic, or you get in an accident and you need to get your horse quiet, that you have something, some mild sedative you can give your horse easily before the vet gets there.
Sophie, did you have your hand up? I saw a brief picture of Sophie with her hand up and then she disappeared. If you want to put your hand up again. Sophie?
Yeah, Sophie wrote a note.
Oh.
Is a yellowish wet manure okay while you're brushing? Are there other things to look out for?
Oh, here it is.
So I think that would go back to what Emma and I were talking about as far as what is your horse's normal. So if they've got yellowish wet manure, that they tend to always get a little bit of runny manure when you're grooming them and when you're brushing them, then that means that brushing them is causing them a little bit of stress. And is there a way that you can make brushing or grooming them a little bit less stressful for them? Maybe you can groom them while they're eating their hay, or maybe you can make sure that they have a buddy in the barn with them. Maybe you're always brushing them all alone when they don't have a friend that they can see. Or maybe you're using the wrong tools. Emma and I are really big on having about 3 bazillion tools when we're grooming, because every horse has a different brush that they like. And so maybe that brushing experience is causing them nerves. Now, if that's just their normal manure while you're brushing, sure, that's fine. But it's just about knowing what would be their normal and what wouldn't be normal. And if it's specific that when you're brushing them, it's causing them stress, try to figure out a way to make it less stressful for them.
Without making this an entire lecture, can you explain the currying technique for the fascia?
I'm just looking to see if I have one right here. Hold on.
Whilst Kat gets it, I'll explain. It's basically in very layman's terms, you go against so if you go perpendicular to the way the muscle lies. So when you put your hand flat on the horse and move in a circular motion, the skin should feel very free, and all the skin around your hand as you're moving your hand in a small circle should be very free. But with this particular tool, you go across the muscle. So say in general, the way the hair lies is the way the muscle goes, and you would go perpendicular to that. Am I using the right word, Kat? I don't know.
No. No luck. I just got back from a clinic yesterday and I thought that I didn't unpack properly, but I unpacked and put all my stuff away. So my posture preps are back in the barn.
But yeah, so you go against this. Am I using the right term, perpendicular? I'm just checking my science.
Yes.
Perpendicular
Yeah.
to this.
So if the muscles are laying this way, you want to brush.
There you go.
Against the muscles like this. If you look up posture prep, she has a bunch of YouTube videos and she demonstrates all about how to use it. It's one of my favorite kid tools too, because it's just about anybody can learn the technique and the horses just love it.
So a little technical here. Whoops, I just lost it. How do you go about making quarter marks? And some of the dressage people may not know what quarter marks are.
So the way we go about doing quarter marks, there's 2 different ways. You can either use a stencil, which is a sheet of plastic that has a pattern cut out in it. We would spray their hind quarters, and I should first say quarter marks are simply fancy designs on their tush. So on their hind quarter muscle, we lay patterns into their hair that glistens and catches the light. Eventers love it. It's one of our favorite ways to make our horses beautiful, and it sort of enhances the muscling and the movement of the horse, and so it's one of those fun, pretty things to do. But so you make a stencil. You can use a stencil, which is a plastic sheet with a pattern in it. You make the hair damp with some fly spray or some witch hazel, and then you brush all the hair in one direction, lay the stencil down, and then gently brush backwards across the stencil so that the hair that is in the hole of the pattern is pointing a different direction, and then you carefully pull the stencil off, and there's your quarter mark. There's also some very complicated brush techniques where you brush down and then brush in certain directions to create freehand designs, which are oftentimes the ones that you'll see the shark's teeth and the V's and W's and lines that you see on the horses at the events. That unfortunately I'm not exactly sure how to even start explaining without.
By the book.
Yeah, by the book. It's in the book. But I'm not exactly sure how to demonstrate it without pictures and a horse and that kind of stuff.
Okay, we have perhaps our last question. We've talked about yellow legs. How about yellow tails on gray horses?
So it is very similar to yellow legs. one of our philosophies is that you shouldn't over shampoo, but unfortunately, if you have a gray or a white horse, that philosophy goes out the window, and you do have to work on it pretty much on a daily basis. But the big thing too is people don't realize that you need to have a well-conditioned tail. And I sort of try and give the analogy that a dry sponge takes up a lot more water than a wet sponge. So if you have a well moisturized conditioned tail, it'll actually take up a lot less stain than a very dry, brittle tail. So that needs to be part of your washing program, making sure your tails are moisturized and conditioned once or twice a week, especially through the show season. And then it goes back to, as Kat was saying with the legs, making sure you use the shampoo before you use your graying shampoos. And I think what's important to realize too is, like, everywhere you go, it's different. The water type itself, whether it's soft or hard water, can have effect on how useful each product is. So sometimes I'll always have sort of like a Tide OxyClean laundry detergent at the bigger shows, and I will use the OxyClean to try and brighten my tails up, because you don't know what type of water you use, and that seems to be pretty effective wherever, whatever the water is. So elbow grease, taking time to do it. You're probably going to be washing your tail every day, a week out from any show, and adding moisturizer, and again then adding a detangler when your tail's dry, to try and create a barrier against more stain going on through the show.
There
I
is
would
one
also
more
add-
question. I'm sorry, were you adding something?
I was just going to say, make sure that if you've got a gray tail that you're trimming it, especially in the winter time and especially in the non-competitive times, because if you're letting that tail, when you're not washing it regularly, drag in the mud, then it's going to pick up staining that travels up through the tail. So just making sure that you're keeping, even if you like a really long tail on your horse, making sure that you're trimming it and taking the ends off so they're not dragging in any mud or dirt, especially in the seasons that you're not, competing.
Thank you. We did have one question that was sent in advance that I sort of warned you about: tips for braiding a very sparse, uneven, and rubbed out mane. How do you add volume to the areas with little hair?
So I'll tell you my favorite trick is, if I have a horse who's rubbed really badly, I'll use matching yarn, and I will, at the beginning of the braid, basically give them fake hair. I will lay 3 or 4 pieces of yarn in the braid in each section and then braid that in. And then when I roll the braid up, I'll tie the yarn into it so that you don't see it. The only key with that is making sure you have very matching yarn, because if it doesn't match, it looks a bit funny. So that way, what I'll try to do is make sure I'm never pulling those manes. I'm shortening them with a razor blade, and then I'll try to add in however much yarn I need in each section to give that button, so to speak, some bulk so that it matches the other ones up and down the neck.
Yeah,
Well,
I do it the same way.
There we go.
Kat and Emma, this was fascinating, and I wanted to go yes, many times on things that you said that I'm running into so much as well. I find that everybody sort of thinks if they go brushy, the job's done, and no one really realizes that you have to be fit to give a good grooming. It really is exercise for the human being, and I wish people spent a little more time in the actual grooming part. So much, they're taking such good care of their horses in many ways, but then it's brushy, and it's done. So thank you very, very much. We really appreciate it. And I think, is it next week you go to Lawrence?
We're there
Prizes?
the first weekend in May. I think it's
First
2
weekend in
weeks.
May.
Yep.
You're going to be in.
You're most certainly
Oh,
Oh.
my watch just talked to me. The first week in May, you're going to be at Lawrence Prizers in Virginia.
Mhm.
And I think we sent out information about that in our our last newsletter. Is that right, Mary?
Yep, the information was in our team newsletter.
Yeah, so that'll be a in-person, hands-on event. So thank you again. Really,
Thank
really
you.
appreciate it.
Thank
Great,
you
thank you so much for
us.
having us.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.